Move over uniparty. The people are legislating now. And British Project Alchemy provoking nuclear World War III. Coming up on today's Citizens Report. Welcome to the Citizens Report for the 28th of November. I'm Elisa Barwick. Joining me today is Citizens Party Research Director Robert Barwick. Welcome, Robbie.
Thanks, Elisa.
And on today's show, today is the last sitting of Parliament for the year, and while
Maybe.
probably,
Should be.
and while they're struggling to get through 36 or something pieces of legislation through the Senate, we are going to tell you about some major victories that we and the people of Australia have accomplished. Very, very good news on that front. And then we'll come back to talk about the immense danger. I think the world has never been closer to potential nuclear World War III. And we're going to reveal from people we're working with overseas a major expose that shows the British-run operation to keep the war in Ukraine going, an absolute meat grinder war to change the global geopolitical dynamic. So definitely stay tuned for that one. Now, to help get the word out on these critical subjects, subscribe and ring the notification bell, hit the like button, circulate this on social media, and please, if you can, donate below to support our ongoing efforts to try to diffuse the dire situation this country and the world are in.
And please comment below as well. We value your feedback.
Yeah, that's the one I forgot. Righto, so straight into it today. Move over uniparty. The people are legislating now.
Drum roll.
So, yes, look, this week, and we foreshadowed it last week, it was almost in the bag, but this week we have secured the defeat of the Misinformation and Disinformation Bill. This was a major effort from all kinds of organisations and generally the people of this country that have had it with this kind of rushed legislation that amounts to censorship. That's it, full stop. And we're going to also mention that we are forcing major financial and economic shifts as well. But first, on the dumping of the MAD bill. So on Monday this week, Government Senator Karen Grogan stood up in Parliament to move a motion to discharge the MAD bill from the notice paper for action in the Senate.
Yep.
So the government themselves
Killed the
bill, went in, withdrew it from the list of legislation. So it is a done deal. It is gone. This is extremely good news. Everyone should give themselves a pat on the back.
Since we did the show last week, Elisa, the developments came thick and fast. On the show last week, we emphasised that there was the numbers were there on paper to defeat the bill, but there was this danger that when the bells rang for 4 minutes to take the final vote, someone may trip over their shoelaces and not get into because after 4 minutes the doors are locked, right? You can't get in.
If you're not in, you're not in.
And people inside Parliament had expressed a concern to me that because this MAD bill to censor what they define as mis and disinformation was initially a Liberal Party policy, that the elitists in the Liberal Party who secretly really want this stuff might be the ones to trip over their shoelaces, right? And 2 or 3 of them not make it in time and, oh no, the bill's passed, and we've got so much else to do, we can't take a revote, etc. So that was the danger. And so therefore we said the way to make sure we actually kill it is we've got to get the Greens to put it beyond doubt. The Greens need to come out and come out against this bill. And one of the things that we did, there's lots of different organisations, but we kind of almost uniquely targeted the Greens because we'll put into the Greens arguments such as the fact that the information that they repeat about, say, Gaza, the opposition, like the Liberals and Labor, call that disinformation, right? And so the Greens, we were saying, why are you pussyfooting around with this, right? You know this will be used against you. Anyway, so that was on Thursday we recorded. Friday, Sarah Hanson-Young, the Green senator, came out and completely opposed the bill. And she has slightly different reasons than the Liberals and Labor and Independents, etc. But nevertheless, that was the outcome. The Greens put it beyond doubt. And so on Sunday, the government announced that they were going to drop the bill. And what Senator Karen Grogan, who had chaired the inquiry, what she did on Monday was just the formality of killing the bill. You get it discharged from the notice paper. Now, when you look at the way this played out, Elisa, the stunning victory here, which included the record-breaking public feedback, like unprecedented. We hadn't seen it before. What do we got?
Well, so remember when it originally was put up, it got, I think, 26,000 submissions, and then they ditched it at that point.
That's called the exposure draft. They initially released the legislation. They say, what do you think of this? And we know what it takes to get submissions to an exposure draft. That one got 26,000. That was enough for the Liberals then. They thought, people hate this, we're going to drop it. Then, according to Matt Canavan, one of the senators, the National Party senator, the inquiry, which remember allowed 1 week.
Yeah.
1 week.
This is the thing.
Now, we reported last week
Yeah.
it got 15,000 submissions. No, we were wrong. It got 30,000 submissions.
Or over 30,000.
Over 30,000 in 1 week. Like, you would have to be an utter moron in Parliament not to realise that that's not a little, sometimes, like in the old Westerns, there's a puff of cloud, smoke or whatever on the horizon. What is that? And that's the dust. And after a while, it's the dust being kicked up by a stampeding herd of buffalo. Right? But this one, there was no little wisp of cloud.
Yeah.
There was it was right on them straight away. To not realise, hang on, this is hated. If people are that motivated that they drop everything and within a week come up with 30,000 submissions, this is hated. What are we doing? And that's where they got the message from.
So it's very significant, particularly given that had initially bipartisan support, that the evolution of it was just stunning to watch and a victory for the people of this country. Now, the other bill which received quite unprecedented response is the banning social media for under 16s bill, which was an even more unbelievable process of inquiry that was launched.
Well, okay, so what they did here was on Friday, it was announced that this particular bill, which people should be, I'm assuming most viewers will be familiar with it, they would stop. Initially they said your kids under the age of 16, you're watching this on YouTube, your kids and grandkids under the age of 16 wouldn't be allowed to watch YouTube if this bill had gone. Then they changed that, and it's not really clear what it's going to affect per se, but I think because of the way the MAD bill played out, where they actually did go through a proper process of scrutiny, right? Because of the way that played out, even though the inquiry was very quick, they allowed a week for submissions. That was ridiculous, but they allowed it, etc. They decided in the case of this bill, because it was bipartisan, Labor and Liberal ganged up on this. This is the uniparty. They decided, well, it was the scrutiny that stopped that bill. We're not even going to allow the scrutiny. And the Senate jacked up, and then they did get an inquiry, but with 1 day, 24 hours to make submissions, right? I got the Citizens Party submission in. We had a barbecue. I'd finished writing it. It was really rushed. We did a rushed submission, finished writing it. I left it on my computer, and the next morning I got up and realised I hadn't sent it in.
No.
And then I emailed it in, and they still accepted it. It's up there as number 83 on the published list. But then Senator Matt Canavan again, who's done a good job on these bills, he revealed a figure I couldn't believe, and I actually doubted. We were having a discussion in the office. We were disputing whether that figure could be correct, but it was correct. In 1 day, they got 15,000 submissions. In 1 day.
That's brilliant.
Now, why did we come? And when you get 15,000, someone said to us, were they all against it? When you get 15,000 submissions in 1 day, yes, they're all against
Pretty much.
it. People aren't motivated to do that if they support something. They're motivated to do that if they oppose something.
Oh, good job, pat on the back. They don't need to put in a submission for that.
Exactly. And it was universally ridiculed by again, all the people that aren't part of government departments.
Yeah.
Right? But Labor and Liberal ganged up to get this through. And it turns out that whenever Labor and Liberal do that, you know there's something really dodgy.
And one of the issues that had raised a lot of contention was that, you know, the question of how do the social media companies determine your age, or particularly if it's, you know, a young person that doesn't have ID because they don't have a driver's license or whatever. And this is where the whole kit and caboodle was opened regarding facial recognition. And, you know, Dutton, it turns out Peter Dutton has promoted facial recognition as a justifiable technology. He said it's quite appropriate to use this technology back in June. But we want to run a video here that shows someone's compiled this, showing that he's been pushing facial recognition technology for this and other purposes for quite a while.
This week, all the premiers around Australia and the chief ministers of the various territories got together with the Prime Minister and they handed over your driver's licence. Yes, they've done a deal to hand over the pictures from your driver's licence to the federal government for a national register of faces for facial recognition technology.
The federal government wants to go big with a massive central hub that agencies from the public and private sectors could access. Peter Dutton reckons it'll help law enforcement crack down on identity crime.
The powers under this legislation would be given to Peter Dutton, and in my opinion, he's one of the most dangerous ministers we've ever had. He controls immigration, he controls Border Force, he controls ASIO, he controls the federal police, and now he's going to be able to control all of the facial recognition technology under this new legislation.
The government wants to set up a database that would match images of everyone captured on CCTV with their driver's licence and passport photos. They've dubbed the system the Capability.
Attempts by the federal government to create a facial recognition database were rejected by a parliamentary committee late last year because of concerns about privacy and human rights.
Well, the push to raise the minimum age for social media has received a major boost this morning. Opposition leader Peter Dutton has declared he will make it happen within the first 100 days of a future coalition government. Mr Dutton is promising to roll out an age verification system across the country.
I think that we have a huge capacity here within our system. The technology is much better than it was 5 years ago. Facial recognition to determine somebody's age is appropriate.
What would be the worst case scenario with technology like this in terms of violation of people's rights?
The government can watch and identify people who are of interest to them, and they can use the information they get for whatever purposes they want.
Now, Elisa, the thing with Peter Dutton that people need to take stock of is he is the leader of the Liberal Party. Liberal is a word that is associated with the word freedom. There's nothing liberal about this guy. His whole career, and that went back to 2017. Most people have heard of all this. We talked about this previously in the show about Chinese social credit. This became a narrative after like 2018, supposedly. And the reason why is because some liars put out these claims about China at the same time as there was a TV show called Black Mirror, which was about dystopian futures where our technology is controlled by everything, and people just conflated the two. You can go to China, right, and yeah, they have really good surveillance systems and electronic stuff for transacting and whatever, but they still take cash. They find small businesses who don't take cash, and nobody is lining up to get a social credit score on anything. It's all rubbish. The only credit scores they have are the same credit scores the West has, right? Anyway, but the reason I'm saying that is because people would have heard this narrative about China. Before you ever heard that, this guy, Peter Dutton, was pushing facial recognition in your own country. This is the guy who, when he was Immigration Minister and then Home Affairs Minister, he brought in the power so that if anyone comes into Australia from overseas, including Australian citizens, Customs, which is now called Border Force, because these fascists like to sound like fascists, used to be called Customs. Welcome to our country. Yeah, we'll make sure you're not bringing in something dodgy, but we're going to be nice to you. No, it's now Border Force, man, right? These people want to present an iron fist to let you know they're going to stump you And nobody is more fascist than this guy. As the immigration minister, not only did he enjoy torturing people, refugees in concentration camps offshore, yes, concentration camps offshore, that's what we've done to refugees, and people like him enjoyed it. He enjoyed corruptly paying these private companies hundreds of millions of dollars to do it, and everyone's on the take on this thing, and no Australians looked at it because, oh, that's just Muslim refugees, we don't care about them. But if they're willing to do it to them, they're going to do it to you. That's who Peter Dutton is. There is nothing liberal, small L liberal, about this guy. He has wanted this kind of fascist technology forever. He is at his heart an out fascist. And he's a warmonger to boot, because if he ever got a chance, he would love to declare war on China and blow up his whole country. There is nothing redeemable about this character. He is the reason behind this bill. The under-16s bill is Dutton's policy. That's why it was a uniparty policy. He got the Labor Party to cave in October and say, I will adopt it too.
Yeah.
And now they're going to bring in something. Now, thank God for people like Matt Canavan in the coalition, because they've said, no, we're not going to tolerate something that might be a digital ID, a Trojan horse for a digital ID, or facial recognition. But I was just listening to the debates was just taking place. They've just suspended it for a while. I was listening to the debate now, and I don't know yet whether the amendments that are going to be put up to make sure there's no digital ID will actually get through. Because if Dutton and Albo have done a deal, there's no reason for any of the amendments to get through. So we'll see. And if they do get through, that's again thanks to the people of Australia putting up a stink about it, right? The other thing about this particular law, though, and Dutton, is Murdoch is claiming credit for it. Rupert Murdoch, and Media Watch did I already knew about this, but Media Watch did a good story about this on Monday night. When there's a war behind the scenes between the big mainstream media, especially Murdoch, and the big tech companies like Twitter and Facebook, etc. Because a while ago, Facebook decided to stop paying to run news stories from mainstream media on its site, because it used to pay them a fee, and then he said, well, we're not going to do it anymore. We don't care if people don't share those stories, right? And so ever since then, the Murdoch media, purely out of self-interest, has been on a jihad against social media. And the thing to just be clear on, the particular issues they highlight, they've always been issues, right? MySpace and Facebook were screwing up teenagers the minute they started. You could go back 20 years and see those articles about teenage addiction to these sort of things. There have always been issues. The sanctimony about, the moralising about stopping it didn't start until Rupert Murdoch started losing money, right? And now they've been able to take that and Dutton's fascist fantasy, his authoritarian fantasy of being able to surveil everything we do as an extension of the US National Security Agency, the things that Edward Snowden exposed, the things that Julian Assange exposed, right? They're the ones who want the surveillance state on literally everything we do. They've now got, they thought, we'll see how the bill plays out, they thought they got their Trojan horse to do it. That's who you're dealing with Peter Dutton, people. Don't fall for this guy. There's no way I'm going to vote for the Liberals to get back in. Well, I'm not going to vote for them anyway, right? They're the uniparty. They could, but under preferential voting, one goes over the other. Until the Liberals get rid of this guy, our country's in danger.
Yeah.
And that's the bottom line.
And speaking of the upcoming election, look, the Uniparty are very worried if you look at what we've just discussed and numerous other issues, because the growing crossbench over, successive elections for a long time now mean that at every election, the Uniparty vote is dwindling. And more, the crossbench is growing with each election. And seemingly the more they try to do to limit it, it just gets worse, because, they're just proving their own stripes and that they're incapable of real leadership. So one of the other pieces of legislation on the agenda that people will have been hearing about is electoral reform legislation.
And and this is as shameless as it gets, right? So when the Uniparty, Labor and Liberal, they just decide, well, we're going to rig the system, and it doesn't matter. And it's things like bringing in, here's an example. Individual candidates have an $800,000 cap on what they can spend on election in a seat, right? But that cap, now $800,000, they say, well, if you can't win a seat from $800,000, then you'll never be able to win it. But because of the way the parties, the two major parties are structured, it doesn't apply to them. Because the independent, who may be about to displace one of the major parties from one of those seats, can only spend $800,000. But the Labor Party candidate or the Liberal Party candidate, they can spend $800,000 just as candidates, and then their parties can spend money promoting the party independently of the candidate way above that, right? Things like that. It's just, it's all rubbish. And it's one of those things whenever the two major parties combine, right? There's something nefarious going on. But, and just before we move on, I want to, like, people need to appreciate it through our eyes. We're not part of all these other parties that are in Parliament, but I can tell you, I consider it a net positive that they're there.
Oh, absolutely.
Because the more that the two major parties are forced to do one or two things, if they don't want to keep exposing to the public that they're really on the same side in a uniparty, right? Then to get bills through, they have to negotiate through the crossbenchers, and that's a good thing because there's more transparency, there's more debate, right? That's a good thing, and then so that's a good thing. And if they don't want to do that, then they have to stop pretending and just merge as one big uniparty. And then the whole country will see them for what they are, and that's a good thing too, right? This is a positive thing. Keep voting for the minor. We'll vote for the Citizens Party, of course, right? But if we're not in your seat, and there's a good minor party or independent, vote for them.
Yeah, but always put us first, and then your pick of Labor and Liberal down a bit lower, because you can do that, you know.
And now, second last and last, like, you know.
Yeah,
if you have
a bit lower down the
If
bottom.
you have one you hate less than the other, put them second last.
Yeah, exactly. But another example of the importance of having a big crossbench and how we've been able to, from our position even outside of the Parliament, shift policy is I want to go through some of the goings on coming out of Treasury and Finance at the moment, and the question of what's happened to Jim Chalmers, the Treasurer, and Stephen Jones, because there's a pattern of things here which is the result of holding these guys' feet to the fire, no two ways about it. Because if you think about the Reserve Bank reforms legislation and the fact that the big drive from Treasurer Chalmers was to take away the ability of the government to have oversight over the Reserve Bank to intervene in monetary policy, he was going to give that power away to the bankers, to the dictates of the international agencies like the Bank for International Settlements that can that put through all their policies
Completely
to tell central banks what
sovereignty.
to do. Exactly. So that was his intention. But now I'll just run through a list of what has come out of his agenda. And the way I was thinking about it is that he's a bit like because the election's coming up, he's a bit like the horse in the gate, in the horse race that failed to even get out of the gate until the winning horse is about to put the nose over the line, and suddenly he's launched this major charge. He's going full pelt because, there's an election coming up. I've got to, get some runs on the board here. And he knows the issue because we've defined the issue. He knows what people want because the people have made it known. They want economic sovereignty. They want financial sovereignty. They don't want the RBA to have full slather on continuing to raise interest rates or keep them high. So what has he done? Okay, the Post Office Bank, back on Labor's agenda. That was the number one shift that we recorded, which we reported back several months ago. And an update on that, by the way, is that have a look at this Canberra Times article, which is pushing forward this idea. This is from the head of COSBOA and the head of one of the heads of
the chairman of the LPO group. So COSBOA is the Council of Small Business Organisations of Australia. It's the peak small business lobby in the country. So they have now come out fully for the Postal Bank, and Scott Etherington is the chair of Licensed Post Office Group, who have been supporting the Postal Bank all along, right? But this is very significant, and that was in the Canberra Times this week because Scott Etherington was in Parliament meeting with government officials on the Postal Bank. So the discussions are being held.
Yeah.
We just have to see what comes out of that.
This is moving. Then you had, when we talked about, I think, these two items last week on the show, the Treasurer proposed a levy on banks to keep branches open. So the banks with fewer branches would subsidise others so that those branches can stay open. Now, again, all of his interventions are mealy mouthed, you know, halfway house type proposals. Yeah, but nonetheless, he wouldn't have had any of this on his to-do list.
He's been forced to respond to it.
Exactly, unless we'd pushed and forced the issue. So that was the bank branches levy. And then the other thing was the cash mandate, where businesses that sell essential products from food to fuel, etc., must accept cash, that they want to mandate that. And again, this is a pale copy of the bill to mandate cash use across the board, put forward by Andrew G and Bob Katter. Yep. But again, forced to go in that direction.
What it means is there's now a floor under which the banks will not be able to get rid of cash, which they had hoped to get rid of it entirely.
Yeah.
Now they can't.
Now, another issue is that, as people might have heard, the Treasurer is putting through an update to the investment mandate of the Future Fund to, quote, ensure that the board has regard to national priorities as part of the fund's overarching investment strategy, those national priorities being the energy transition, increasing housing supply and delivering improved infrastructure. Again, very mealy-mouthed the way, if you look at the details. However, it's very interesting that suddenly he's talking about the government being able to intervene on these investment funds.
Now, Lisa, there's a neoliberal meltdown to this proposal because, and people might have heard it. And you might be surprised that we're speaking well of this idea, because the way it's presented, it automatically sounds like, oh, this is the government interfering. But understand what that means. We may not like them, but they are the elected government. And the counter position to this is, no, the elected government should never be able to do anything, because anything it does is so-called interference. We set up these systems which involve huge amounts, $240 billion in the case of the Future Fund, huge amounts of public money, and only independent people get to decide what to do to that, and that's completely devoid of what the what the will of the people expressed through their government wants.
This is our money in this fund.
Exactly. And so it's actually, this was one of the big scams of neoliberalism. They made us believe that government, any action by government is somehow political interference. No, it's a government doing its job. The problem is, the reason we're in this mess is because the government privatised everything and deregulated everything, so it wouldn't have to do its job. And now Jim Chalmers, he's not even talking about ordering the Future Fund to make investments. What he's saying is, we're going to change the investment mandate, and so this is as a case in point. So the Future Fund currently invests in things like weapons manufacturers, and so all they're proposing is, well, we'll change the investment mandate. So if the Future Fund has an investment possibility of, say, a weapons manufacturer, so we can make money for Australians out of helping blow up people in Gaza.
Which it does do.
Or it has an opportunity to invest in a housing project, which gets the same return, but it'll actually build housing for Australians. The mandate says it should invest in the housing project rather than that. That's all it is. The freak out is because, you can't have any kind of will of the people expressed through the economy. No, that is the lie. These guys aren't very good at it, but in principle, it's better that they're starting to stick their toe in the water to do it rather than the default freak out that you're hearing in the media.
And it's only allowed to pursue such investments like in housing and so forth if it can still make its mandated few percentage point returns above the cash rate, right? So it's only going to be if it's profitable, which building public housing.
And frankly, that's what people should be mad about, right? If you're going to be mad about something, get mad that the Future Fund there's this huge body of taxpayer money owned by the Australian people, public money, that has to make a massive profit, which means a profit comes out of your pocket.
Yeah.
This is what the bigger profit that corporations make, the less money in the customers' pockets. That's the way business works. And so they're saying, you've got to make an 8% profit making public housing. That's what people should be mad about. They should be saying, no, the benefits of public housing far outweigh whatever profit. Make a token profit, Future Fund. Let's get some public housing out there. That's what they should be doing.
Yeah, because this is why they're investing in BAE Systems and Lockheed Martin, which is quite profitable and lucrative at the moment, and not public housing. So, we've got to change all of that, of course. Now, the final thing on the list of what's coming out of the Treasury at the moment is another move, which is interesting, to end the secrecy of offshore hedge funds, which use complex financial derivatives and the like to camouflage their increasing ownership of Australian companies, their shareholdings and so forth. So overseas companies coming in, but hiding their control over Australian companies using these complex derivatives. So that's also another interesting thing.
And on the face of it, a good thing, because whenever hedge funds...
But it's just bringing us into line with other overseas jurisdictions.
As a member of the British House of Lords said 10 years ago, that investment bankers, and he means including hedge funds, are extremely adept at finding a way between the wallpaper and the wall, right? And they're always looking for angles, and they run the world. And the more governments step in front of them and say, no, you're not going to do that, right? You have an agenda, then that's a good thing.
Yeah. Now, to be clear, what he's doing in this hodgepodge, piecemeal, lukewarm way would all be resolved by our top-down approach of having a national bank through post office outlets, infrastructure investment through national credit, and things like Glass-Steagall legislation, so that you prevent deposit-taking banks from gambling and speculating, and we can begin to get our economy back on track.
The risk he runs by doing it in a half-baked way, like a timid way, like this, is it nevertheless...
You're not going to please anyone.
It nevertheless provokes a huge reaction, as we've seen with the Future Fund, and then politically, these cowards put their tail back between the legs and say, "You can't do that." If you're going to take on the establishment, if you're going to take on the powers that be, the vested corporate interests, you take them on, right? And if you really take them on, the public will come in behind you.
That's right. That's your protection. All right, now on to our next topic. British Project Alchemy provoking nuclear World War III. Now, before we get to Project Alchemy, of course, we have on the war front at the moment some very dangerous developments, and that started when the United States gave permission to Ukraine, and no one knows exactly who made the decision because it wasn't Joe Biden. But on the 19th of November, Ukraine used American-supplied ATACMS weapons, which is Army Tactical Missile System weapons, and fired them into the Bryansk region of Russia, just to the north of Ukraine's border. Subsequently, the next day, Storm Shadow missiles, which are the British equivalent of the same missile systems, were launched into the Kursk region of Russia, and then additional ATACMS missiles hit Russian territory on the 23rd and the 25th of November up until early this week, to which Russia is still preparing a retaliation. They did retaliate, however, to the first strike, which I'll come to in a moment. But, of course, these are US-UK supplied and guided missiles. The French have also approved the use of their equivalent Scalp missiles. And what that means is that this is no longer a proxy war anymore because of the direct involvement of the US, the UK, and potentially France. So Russia's response to that, on the 21st of November, Russia fired its Oreshnik hypersonic missile at a defence plant in Dnipro in Ukraine. We can put up a background video here that'll show you that strike. Now, this was initially suspected to be an intercontinental ballistic missile, an ICBM. However, it isn't. It's what's called an IRBM, intermediate range ballistic missile.
But I'll point out with the video, Elisa, that people are seeing, is the speed. What blew everyone's mind was the speed. So when you normally see this, you normally see, if you've ever seen missiles strike, it's a fraction slower. This was really fast.
Yes.
And it's shocked everybody that Russia has this capability.
Now, President Putin gave a speech immediately thereafter announcing that this was a test missile which travels at Mach 10 times the speed of sound. It was in response, he said, to the ATACMS launch. He also went on to say that this is a new missile involving new capabilities that didn't exist previously, and that there's a whole range of new similar systems currently being designed with varying ranges, but that this particular model, the Oreshnik, is going immediately into mass production. And he also said that the US made the first move on this front when Trump abolished the Intermediate Range Nuclear Forces Treaty in 2019. That was when Russia started work on this program, on this weapon system. Now, what he stated unequivocally, I just want to quote 3 of the brief statements that he made. He said, because Ukraine can't guide these missiles itself, that means that the launching of them was enabled only by the US and the UK. Therefore, he said, it is not a question of allowing the Ukrainian regime to strike Russia with these weapons. It is about deciding whether NATO countries become directly involved in the military conflict. That's the issue. Then he went on to say that from the time of the US launched ATACMS strikes, he said the regional conflict in Ukraine provoked by the West has assumed elements of a global nature. Right, so you're talking World War, direct conflict between NATO and Russia. And then he said, in order to assure the security of the Russian Federation, he said, we consider ourselves entitled to use our weapons against military facilities of those countries that allow use of their weapons against our facilities, meaning US, UK, France, if it indeed participates. Yep. And there's a list of countries that has been circulated that this Oreshnik missile, can reach across Europe and the world, which we can put up in the background. So you can see the list as it scrolls through and the map at the same time, because these do have a significant range.
But also, Elisa, I might remind viewers that a while ago in this conflict, there was a bit of a boast that Australian-made drones that were being sent to Ukraine were being used for attacks inside of Russia. And that formulation that you just quoted, that means we're on the list too. And of course we know the guidance for the missiles relies on technology from places like Pine Gap in the middle of Australia.
Exactly. Now add to that picture that on the 19th of November, Putin formally signed the update to Russia's nuclear deterrence policy, which says that an attack on Russia by a non-nuclear country with participation of a nuclear country is considered a joint attack by those two and can justify Russia's nuclear response. Also, nuclear response is justified upon detection of a ballistic missile attack or a quote-unquote massive launch of other, not necessarily nuclear, missile attacks, including swarms of drones and other missiles. So this is getting extremely serious, and you have to ask, okay, what is the US response to this? Will they take Russia's red lines seriously? Will they stop saying, you know, Russia's bluffing, etc.? I mean, you have to think about this for a moment from Russia's standpoint. They look at what they risked and lost during World War II. They are not going to let that happen again. They know this is not about Ukraine, which is not a threat to them. They know this is about that they're being targeted by NATO, by the US, by the UK. So they take it very seriously. And mind you, the US Strategic Command Admiral Thomas Buchanan blurted out at a think tank event that he was speaking at on the 20th that if a nuclear exchange did occur, he said, we want to do it in terms that are most acceptable to the United States. So Russia knows they're dealing with a country here which has leaders that think they can manage a limited nuclear exchange, which is the height of insanity. So they have to take that seriously. But I will add, and you can read more about it in our Australian Alert Service Washington Insider column this week, that this authorisation to use the ATACMS against Russia is being taken very seriously, and there are significant moves to force Biden to be accountable for this, but actually moves even to impeach him because of breaching the congressional authorization. He didn't seek congressional authorisation and hasn't even invoked the War Powers Act, which has to happen if you're leading into this kind of a potential scenario. But what we want to go through now is because it's only understanding what led to this point that you can begin to take it on and tackle it and hopefully diffuse the dangers associated with it. And that's why
because the Western narrative is this. We beat Russia in the Cold War, right? We brought democracy to Russia, and then the equivalent of Hitler got elected, named Vladimir Putin, and he's out to reconquer Europe, all of Russia, bring back the Soviet Union and the whole world, and we have to stop him. That's the Western narrative. Variations on that, it's all rubbish. But the people who, even more so than the Americans, behind this narrative are the Brits, who have centuries of history they are the masters of geopolitics, and geopolitics is divide and conquer, right? How do you keep yourself at the top by dividing all your potential rivals, etc.? And they've got centuries of hatred of Russia and the Russian Empire and all that kind of stuff. And so what we're about to go through is how that has played out in the last few years to bring us to this point.
And we don't have a lot of time to go through all of the background, but just recall, of course, that as soon as the 2014 Maidan coup took place, Russia immediately recognised that, and indeed in the build-up to it, that this was a typical colour revolution regime change operation. And this project we're about to discuss now commenced as soon as Russia launched its special military operation because of the fact that people of Russian ethnic background in the eastern side of Ukraine were just being slaughtered, and there was no serious effort for a peace in that region.
Yeah, the Organisation for Security Cooperation in Europe, OSCE, their figures, the official figures of the observers, showed that between 2014 and 2022, there were 14,000 deaths in the eastern Ukraine region, the Donbass. 80% of them were inflicted by the Ukraine regime that America had installed against the people of the Donbass, right? They were fighting back, so 20% of the deaths were on the Ukraine government side, but there was completely unbalanced. This is the official figures, mass slaughter going on there, and that's why something eventually had to be done.
And aside from that, cultural things like banning the Russian language and targeting of any Russian that celebrated national days, and these are people that were running the Ukrainian government by this time, that were descendants of actual Nazis, which again, we don't have time to go into all the history, but you can look at previous shows and we can put up some links to background information. But in any case, as you said, the Russians had to intervene at a certain point. And when that special military operation was launched, in Britain, in the headquarters of the highest levels of the military intelligence establishment, Project Alchemy was launched by the British Ministry of Defence. Its aim was, and this is a quote from their documents, which were, and I should say actually, and we published this article in the Australian Alert Service, this is all from an excellent article by Kit Clarenberg from the Grey Zone. So you can please, I'll put the link there, you can read this, please circulate it, because the Grey Zone got these leaked documents, and you can see this in black and white, where they say the aim of this project was, quote, to keep Ukraine fighting at all costs. And the bigger aim being to smash Putin with, be it a palace coup or some way of him being overthrown, and to subdue Russia in a new envisioned world order.
When you read these documents that we've published, and it's in the Kit Clarenberg article, one of the things you realise when you read it is these people believe their own propaganda, right? So their view internally of Russia is the propaganda view that they have built through disinformation. But a sign of insanity is actually believing your own disinformation. And so they're trying to act out this fantasy. The bottom line, before you go on, is that this is, as soon as Putin goes into Ukraine, these guys launch this thing because their fantasy is like, oh, we're going to sit over here in the UK, we're going to direct this thing, and we want as many Ukrainians to die as possible to keep this war going as long as possible, so that a month later, it was a month in when Zelensky himself had agreed to the deal to end the war. Within a month, hardly anyone had died, right? And who stopped it? It wasn't Joe Biden who went in there. It was Boris Johnson representing this crowd who went in there to stop it.
Sabotaged
so
it.
that they could, and it's their words, at all costs. The hundreds of thousands of Ukrainians who are dead because of that war, at all costs, was Britain's plan. This crowd's plan. That's what you're dealing with.
And if you don't want the same thing to happen to Australia, vis-a-vis a war with China, then pay attention. So this whole Project Alchemy was directed by a group called the Elders, which is described in the documents as a group of fusion players, meaning a conflated group of academics, defence industry figures and the private sector. It was run by Lieutenant General Charlie Stickland, who runs overseas military operations from the British Permanent Joint Headquarters, and the project was run out of a facility near Fort Monkton, which is the Field Training Centre for SIS Operations.
Which is MI6, Secret Intelligence Service.
Now, it produced a, quote, grand strategy operations paper with leading academics, authors, strategists, planners, pollsters, comms, data scientists and tech. I'm quoting them there. And the plans were fed to the highest levels of the British state, including national security structures. And in order to keep the war running in the Ukraine at all costs, they used a combination of on-the-ground covert operations, including sabotage, terror missions, including with the presence on the ground of British military operatives. They even ran what they termed an Operation Gladio, updated for the information age. Now, Operation Gladio refers to the CIA NATO-run false flag units that operated in Europe after World War II with the aim of blocking the communists from gaining more ground politically, using ex-Nazis and fascists left over from...
Especially in Italy, but more than just Italy. And these people committed terrorist attacks, Elisa.
Yeah.
There was a whole string of terrorist attacks for decades
Horrific ones.
across Europe called Operation Gladio, and the British were doing it.
And
this was a British operation to do this. This idea that our governments, are anti-terrorism, rubbish.
Yep.
They are perpetrators of terrorism. They've deliberately killed thousands and thousands of innocent civilians in bombing attacks, etc. Right? Because they think it's their right to control who runs the world. Mm-hmm. They think it's their right to control who gets elected into governments.
Yep.
And that's Operation Gladio. And these documents show that these clowns 2 years ago said, we're going to use Operation Gladio methods in Ukraine.
By name. And for instance, the example is provided in the article with documentation of the Kerch Bridge attack in Crimea that blew up the bridge. Now, they also used a campaign of legal harassment and online censorship. Now, for instance, they state in one of these documents we'll put up on the screen that engaging social media platforms diplomatically, legislatively and perhaps legally to ensure they enforce their existing policies is a quick and relatively easy way to seriously disrupt Russian power projection. They went on to say that this would be enforced because the content of a lot of these media outriders is frequently in contravention of media law in the UK, US and EU, but aggrieved parties currently tend to ignore libel defamation by these outlets. Were they to aggressively pursue these outlets, it is likely they would be forced to close. And they named the grey zone, which did reveal things like the Kerch attack being attributed to these networks at the time through leaked documents.
And in the same spirit, the author, Kit Clarenberg, last year was detained at the Heathrow airport when he flew back into his country by the authorities who were questioning him about things like the funding for the Grey Zone publication that's published this, because this was just a political display of police state powers by the British authorities to intimidate a publication that was giving a different narrative to the establishment line on Russia and Ukraine.
And another element of this was what they called information operations, which was headed by a member of the 77th Psychological Operations Brigade, which is a military unit created around the time of that Maidan coup in 2014, specialising in what they call in their mission statement, counter-adversarial information activity.
Now, as part of the campaign, Elisa, against the MAD bill, mis and disinformation, we used Kit Clarenberg's work related to 77th Brigade and an outfit that the British have called the Countering Disinformation Unit, CDU, which works with this 77th Brigade. And Clarenberg showed that unit, the CDU, is already censoring social media in the UK. And so when we found out that Michelle Rowland, our communications minister, had gone to the UK to sign a memorandum of understanding with them before she came back and revived the MAD bill, right? We pointed out that this is being done with an international agenda in mind. This is like, we called it wartime censorship, the MAD bill. Wartime censorship is the flip side of the same coin of wartime propaganda.
Yep.
Right? And that's what there's one big machine here, and we've helped Australia dodge a bullet so far on it, but these are the people behind it.
And look, the suppression of people putting out Russian propaganda from Ukraine reached the point of hit lists of people to be assassinated, as we've talked about before on the show as well, the Mirotrovic list and other lists. So that's the extreme of it.
That included the Prime Minister of Slovakia, who did get almost killed
Attempted
in an assassination attempt.
Exactly. Now, I want to mention now the economic component of this, because this is the bigger picture issue of a declining Western hegemon, Anglo-American agency that is losing traction and power and control, particularly as its financial system collapses and as countries led by the BRICS and lots of other countries besides that are saying we want an alternative, not just to the US dollar, but to the system that's wreaked havoc on the world. It's basically neo-colonialism. Africa's revolting against it in droves. So what this program, Project Alchemy, proposed was that to defeat Putin in Ukraine would be a means to reshape, quote, the open international order of the future. They fantasised about absorbing post-Putin Russia and its resources, control of all of its resources, which were mentioned, into a Western-dominated financial order using a post-Putin Marshall Plan to integrate Russia and steal everything. And it even referred to the BRICS alliance and to the attempted overthrow of the SWIFT network, financial messaging network, as a major threat. And to them, exactly, to their system. So that really is the impetus and why this is such a hotly charged issue that they have to keep this Ukraine war going. They can't allow peace because the geopolitical arrangements will not go their way if that's the case.
Zbigniew Brzezinski, who was the National Security Advisor to Jimmy Carter, who's the guy who created Al-Qaeda, when he got the Mujahideen into Afghanistan to fight the Russians, right, and gave the world the scourge of Al-Qaeda. In 1997, I think it was 1997, he put out this whole, sort of vision for how ultimately the West's goal is to conquer Russia and break it up into something like 7 pieces, so you don't have a great power anymore, Russia, that dominates the Eurasian landmass. And this goes back to a British imperial fantasy, Halford Mackinder, whoever controls the Eurasian landmass controls the world, right? And so the British have been hating Russia ever since for that. This is imperial mind games and imperial schemes that have been consistently acted upon. They've never come to fruition, and they never will, because Russia, there will be a world war, thermonuclear world war before it happens, right? Because the number one part of the calculus that the West doesn't want to look at is Russia, when push comes to shove, will not back down. They think it will. No. I've seen videos in the last couple of weeks of US congressmen being asked on the street about this Biden escalation, right, with the weapons, and they all say, when they're asked to comment on Putin talking about nuclear threat, they're saying, Putin's bluffing. That mindset right there is what's going to destroy the world. If you think the Russians are bluffing, you're a fool. And remember, this is America doing this in Russia's face, not Russia doing it in America's face. Russia tried to do that once. It's called the Cuban Missile Crisis. And if it wasn't for someone as smart as JFK, but being prepared to treat the Russians seriously, talk to them and negotiate an outcome, which included, in exchange for Russia pulling the missiles out of Cuba, America pulling its missiles out of Turkey. That's what JFK was prepared to do to stop the threat of nuclear war then. Today, these guys are prefer to say, oh no, he's bluffing, we'll get away with whatever we want to get away with. No, that's what will blow the world up. And while there's a debate in America and there's absolute lunatics in America, there is also some smart people in America trying to get some common sense. But the British position that's stirring this up, and there's very little debate on this in the UK, that's in there in the Americans' ear saying, no, we've got to do this, is fundamentally evil, and it's what's going to be to blame if this goes to the worst outcome. The only way you're going to stop it is exposing it. So hats off to Kit Clarenberg and the Grey Zone for doing that.
Yeah, and we do have that article and a whole package of articles on Russia's response to this latest escalation in the Australian Alert Service. We'll put some of those links to articles below, but if you haven't seen it before, contact us on the number on the screen for a complimentary copy of the Australian Alert Service. You can also find the link to subscribe below to get this on a weekly basis. We need to be educating the members of Parliament. We need to be building for our coming campaigns to make policy, as we said in our first headline, because the days of the uniparty are over one way or the other. It's the people that have to be engaged in making the laws of this country, and that's what we're here for. So support us in any way that you can and get involved. That's the show for this week. Thanks, Robbie.
Thanks, Lisa.
Tune in again next week.
Authorised by Robert Barwick, Citizens Party, Melbourne.